Level 1. The Civilian. You've lived your entire life inside craftworld Aeldari without ever holding a weapon, and that's not neglect, it's design, because Aeldari society organizes itself around the path, a structure so deeply woven into how your people think that most civilians go their whole lives moving between artisan halls and seer chambers without a single violent thought crossing their minds in any sustained way. You walk the path of the artist currently, spending your days shaping Wraithbone into forms that resonate with the craftworld's infinity circuit, and the elders who oversee your discipline speak of your work with a quiet approval that most young Aeldari would consider more than sufficient for a full life satisfaction. Aeldari carries a wound most other craftworlds don't, a near-extinction event generations before your birth that hollowed out an entire generation of warriors and left the craftworld's infinity circuit unusually crowded with the dead, ancestor spirits who whisper through the walls in frequencies only the most attuned civilians ever consciously notice. You felt them since childhood, pressure behind your thoughts during meditation that the seers assure you is simply Aeldari's particular character, nothing to fear, though you've noticed the way older Aeldari sometimes go quiet when the subject comes up, the way grief this old apparently never actually finishes settling. Word reaches the artisan halls one morning that a Tyranid splinter fleet has been detected on a heading that intersects Aeldari's patrol perimeter within the month, and the calm you've always taken for granted in your daily life cracks slightly at the edges, because even a civilian raised entirely on the path of the artist understands, in your bones, what it means. When something that hungry turns its attention toward a wounded craft world, the Autarch, overseeing Aeldari's defense, calls for volunteers from every path, artisans, healers, scholars, anyone willing to set aside their discipline temporarily and walk the path of the warrior for as long as the crisis demands. You surprise yourself by volunteering before you've fully finished thinking it through, and the Wraithbone tools you've spent years learning to love sit untouched on your workbench as you walk toward the aspect shrines for the first time in your life, uncertain whether you're answering a calling or simply panicking in a direction that happens to look like courage. Level 2. The Guardian. The armory attendants who fit you for Guardian war gear don't ask whether you've fought before, because the question would be pointless. Almost every Aeldari standing in this hall is walking a version of the same unfamiliar transition, setting aside a lifetime discipline for the blunt necessity of a shuriken catapult and a suit of plated armor that feels, at first, like wearing someone else's skin. Your Guardian Defender squad forms almost entirely from civilians pulled off the paths of healing and scholarship, and the veteran overseeing your training, a Guardian who's clearly done this rotation more times than she'd probably prefer, teaches you the basics of squad cohesion with a patience that suggests she genuinely understands how strange this all feels from the inside. Your first deployment is defensive, holding a perimeter position near one of Aeldari's outer webway gates while the craftworld's true warriors, the aspect warriors bound permanently to their war shrines, deploy to intercept the Tyranid vanguard before it reaches populated sections. You watch a distant firefight through your shuriken catapult sights, close enough to feel useful and far enough to feel like you're watching someone else's war, until a smaller Tyranid bioform breaches the perimeter your squad is actually responsible for holding, and the distance collapses entirely in the space of a single terrifying moment. You fire your shuriken catapult in genuine combat for the first time, hands shaking in a way your path of the artist never once demanded of you, and the creature goes down in a spray of ichor that you'll remember with unsettling clarity for years afterward. Not because the kill itself was remarkable, but because of how completely ordinary your body's fear response turned out to be underneath all your artistic composure. Your squad holds the gate. The veteran Guardian tells you afterward, without any particular warmth, but with something that might be respect, that you didn't freeze when it mattered, which she assures you is the only compliment that actually means anything on a battlefield. Level 3. The Storm Guardian. The Tyranid incursion doesn't end cleanly, splinter organisms continuing to probe Aeldari's defenses for months after the main fleet withdraws, and your Continued willingness to fight earns you reassignment into a Storm Guardian formation, more mobile and more aggressive than the defensive squad you started in, built for striking rather than holding. You're issued twin shuriken pistols and a chainsword, weapons meant for closing distance rather than maintaining it, and the tactical philosophy shift unsettles something in you that the defensive role never quite touched, because holding a line still resembles the kind of patient, deliberate craft you learned on the path of the artist while charging into close combat. Resembles nothing you've ever practiced in your life before this crisis began. Your Storm Guardian squad gets deployed alongside a jet bike-mounted Aeldari formation during a raid against a Tyranid feeder node that's been converting a nearby moon's biomass into fresh spore organisms, and the speed of the operation, in and out before the swarm can properly mobilize a response, teaches you something about Aeldari warfare that the defensive stand never did, that your people's entire military doctrine assumes the war is already lost the moment it becomes a battle of attrition, so every engagement is built to end fast, on your terms, or not happen at all. You lose a squad mate during the withdrawal, a former Path of Healing scholar named Ferrith, who you trained alongside since the perimeter defense cut down covering the squad's retreat from a resurgent bio form nobody had accounted for in the extraction plan. The grief hits you, strangely, filtered through Aeldari's psychic sensitivity into something sharper and more immediate than you expected grief to feel, and you understand for the first time, viscerally, why the seers speak of soulstones and the Ennead cult with such careful reverence, because the alternative to that reverence is watching a friend's death simply vanish into the void with nothing to catch it. Level 4, the Aspect Warrior. Something in how you fought during Ferrith's death, a controlled, almost meditative fury that the surviving Storm Guardians describe afterward in tones you don't fully recognize as describing yourself, draws the attention of the dire Avengers. Shrine, the aspect cult built around disciplined, defensive close combat mastery. Walking the path of the warrior properly, binding yourself to an aspect shrine rather than simply borrowing its weapons for the duration of a crisis, is a different commitment entirely, one that Exarchs warn candidates about explicitly before the binding ritual begins. You'll be channeling a fragment of the war godkind's aspect, they explain, wearing a persona sculpted specifically to make you effective at violence in a way that risks, over time, becoming difficult to set back down when the path eventually calls you elsewhere. You undergo the binding anyway, and the shrine's Exarch, a warrior who's clearly walked this particular path far longer than any single Aeldari life should comfortably allow, guides you through training that reshapes how you move, how you think about combat, how you process the specific controlled violence the dire Avengers doctrine demands. Your first true engagement as a bound aspect warrior is a defense of Aenden's central webway hub against a coordinated Tyranid assault that nearly breaches the craftworld's inner sanctum, fighting alongside Avengers who've worn this aspect for decades. Moving with a coordinated precision that feels less like a squad and more like a single weapon, wielded by several hands at once. You survive the engagement having killed more in a single afternoon than your entire life on the path of the artist prepared you to imagine, and the Exarch tells you afterward, in the flat measured tone that seems to be standard among those who've held an aspect persona this long, that you fought well, and that you should watch carefully for the moment the persona starts feeling more natural than the self you were before it. Level 5, the Exarch candidate. Years bound to the dire Avengers shrine change you in ways that alarm some of the artisan hall friends who still visit occasionally from your old life, noting a stillness in your bearing that wasn't there before, a controlled quality to your speech that resembles the shrine's own Exarch more than the person they remember from the path of the artist. You don't fully disagree with their assessment. The aspect persona has settled into you, deeper than any training exercise warned you it might, and when the shrine's current Exarch falls in a raid gone wrong against a chaos warband probing Aenden's outer defenses, dying in a way that transfers something of his accumulated experience into the shrine's collective war gear. Through processes the aspect cults guard jealously from outside understanding, the surviving Avengers look to you as his most likely successor. Becoming Exarch means a final, deeper binding, one that most path-walking Aeldari never undergo precisely because it makes leaving the aspect persona behind considerably harder, an almost permanent fusion between warrior and war mask that the old Artisan Hall elders speak of with the particular grief reserved for someone who's chosen a road with no easy way back. You accept anyway, standing before the shrine's ancient war gear vault, feeling the weight of every Exarch who's worn this specific persona before you, their accumulated tactical instincts settling into your own mind alongside your own, and the binding ritual leaves you changed in a way that even you struggle afterward to fully articulate to the friends who still occasionally ask whether the artist you used to be is still in there somewhere. Level 6, the Exarch. Command of the Dire Avengers Shrine means responsibility for training the next generation of path-walking warriors who cycle through your care the way you once cycled through your predecessors, civilians and scholars and healers, borrowing the shrine's discipline for exactly as long as their personal crisis demands before returning to whatever life waits for them outside the war mask. You find yourself watching new initiates with something that might be envy, watching them walk back out through the shrine doors toward ordinary lives you can no longer entirely imagine returning to yourself, and you begin, quietly, to understand what the old elders meant about roads with no easy way back. Aeldari's Autarch calls a war council when a second, larger Tyranid presence registers on long-range auguries, this one moving with a coordinated purpose that suggests genuine hive-mind attention rather than a splinter fleet's opportunistic drift, and your shrine's aspect warriors are committed to the defensive line the Autarch's war plan requires, a coordinated stand meant to buy the craftworld's evacuation efforts enough time to matter. You lead your Avengers through 3 consecutive engagements. Over as many days, sleep becoming a resource you manage rather than a need you satisfy, and the tactical clarity the aspect persona grants you starts to feel less like borrowed focus and more like simply how your mind works now, an unsettling realization you don't have time to properly sit with given everything currently trying to kill your people. The defensive line holds. Aeldari's population centers complete their evacuation to the craftworld's inner wraithbone sanctum with time to spare, and the Autarch personally commends your shrine's performance in terms that suggest your name has started circulating through command channels in ways that extend well beyond your own aspect cult. Level 7, the Phoenix Lord's Chosen. Recognition from Aeldari's Autarch eventually earns you something rarer than command of your own shrine, an invitation to train under one of the Phoenix Lords, the immortal founders of the aspect cults who occasionally walk among mortal Aeldari again during crises severe enough to warrant their direct intervention. A sermon himself, the hand of a Serene and founder of the Dire Avengers shrine you've called home for years, arrives at Aeldari during preparations for what the Seers now confirm will be a full hive fleet incursion rather than a probing splinter action, and his presence in your shrine's training halls transforms every lesson you thought you'd already mastered into something considerably more demanding. Training under a being who has quite literally embodied this aspect for longer than your entire civilization's post-fall history strips away assumptions about your own competence that you didn't fully realize you were still carrying, and the humility that follows feels less like defeat and more like finally understanding the actual scale of what your path has been asking of you all along. You fight alongside a sermon during the Hive Fleet's opening assault on Aeldari's outer defenses, witnessing firsthand the difference between skilled mortal execution of an aspect's doctrine and the founder's own effortless, almost casual mastery of violence that looks, from close enough, disturbingly like art. He tells you afterward, in words that surprise you, with their directness, given everything you've heard about Phoenix Lords maintaining careful distance from mortal Aeldari, that your shrine's discipline under sustained pressure reminded him specifically of Aeldari's older, near-forgotten warriors, the ones the craftworld lost generations before your birth, and that the comparison is not one he offers lightly. Level 8, the Autarch. Aeldari's ruling Autarch falls during the Hive Fleet's final assault on the craftworld's inner sanctum, cut down, commanding a defense that ultimately succeeds in breaking the swarm's coordination entirely, and the council of surviving exarchs, farcers, and shrine leaders that convenes in the assault's immediate aftermath reaches toward you as the candidate whose service across this entire crisis has demonstrated exactly the qualities Aeldari's uniquely wounded craft world most desperately needs: someone capable of stepping outside a single aspect persona to command the full breadth of the craft world's martial and civilian resources at once. Becoming Autarch means formally setting aside the dire Avengers war mask you've worn for years, a transition the shrine's remaining Avengers mark with a ceremony equal parts celebration and quiet grief, because an Autarch's role demands access to every aspect's doctrine and none of their singular focus, a return to something resembling the flexibility of your original path of the artist, except now applied to the coordination of war rather than the shaping of Wraithbone. You command Aeldari's defense during the Hive Fleet's final desperate assault with a clarity that draws on every level you've climbed: the patient craft of the artisan, the raw fear-tempered courage of the first Guardian stand, the aggressive mobility of the Storm Guardian raids, the disciplined violence of the Aspect Warrior, the deep tactical instinct of the Exarch, and the Founder's own hard-won humility, and the swarm breaks against Aeldari's defenses in a battle that costs the craft world dearly, but ultimately survives. Standing afterward in the same infinity circuit chambers where you once felt the pressure of Aeldari's ancestor spirits as a nervous civilian on the path of the artist, you understand with unsettling clarity that you will, someday, join that chorus of whispering dead yourself, your own accumulated experience folding into the craft world's collective memory the way every Autarch before you eventually has. You do not know yet whether the artist who first volunteered in a moment of panic that looked like courage is still fully present somewhere beneath everything Aeldari's long war has asked you to become. But somewhere in the artisan halls tonight, a young Aeldari walking the path of the artist is shaping Wraithbone into forms that resonate with the infinity circuit, unaware that a distant sensor array has just registered movement on the perimeter and that Aeldari, wounded and patient, is about to ask something of them too. If this saga was worth your time, hit like and subscribe for the next one.